welcome to the podcast, Daniel.
Hey, thank you very much. Hi, Frederick. So thanks for inviting me. It's actually like a really interesting surprise. Maybe I should start by asking you questions about like how did you find my applications and me.
Yeah, it's funny when when the part of the background is actually on me. So I was sitting around at work a couple of months ago, must have been, and I was listening to music, and I started thinking about back when I was using like Winamp and early versions of iTunes, and like it was really nice to have a visualizer hanging around. So, surely there must be some good ones out there now. And I started looking around, and at least for the Mac, to my mind, it feels like there were only one or two or three. And I think one of them was like a package you had to do something with yourself or something like that. And then there was ferromagnetic, which was just, this is what I wanted.
Yeah. Well, that's pretty much the reason why I made it. So that's super nice to hear.
Yeah. And I was, so I was surprised. I mean, first that there weren't more. And for the other, then when I had realized that there weren't more, I was like, wow, how come this one exists? I want to hear more. And I found a few blog posts, like the release blog post and a few things like that. We'll link them in the show notes, of course. So and then I got in touch, I think, with a few feature requests.
Okay, yeah. So now I remember. Yeah.
Yes. So where did ferromagnetic start from your point of view? Yeah.
So pretty much the same thing that I also was in love with music visualizers from the very early on. I actually remember that. I'm not really an old guy. I'm just like around 30. And when I was younger, Winamp was still like cool. And but I wasn't really into programming back then. I think I was like 10, 15 years old, and even without any programming skills, I was curious like to see like how do those visuals work. And that's when I learned about like that actually the sinus like the scene function can be used to generate all kind of waves and circles, and like you could look into some of the code of some of those early Winamp visualizers and modify it.
The code is out there somewhere?
Yeah, like actually even Winamp had some editors, like depending on which plugins you used, you could have touch the code or edit some of the properties. Well, it was more than 15 years ago, so honestly, I don't even remember all the details. So, but I know that I played around with those, and it was such a magical experience. But then, of course, like years passed, and actually, maybe I could talk a little bit more about my background related to this. So, I studied computer science in Hungary. So I'm originally from Hungary, but then I relocated to Finland and I did my master degree here. And so I've been living in Finland for like 5 years now, and I got citizenship this year, so I'm a dual Hungarian Finnish Hungarian citizen. Yeah, thanks a lot. Actually, from my name, a lot of people assume that I'm from the Nordics, and I also have blonde hair. So my full name is Daniel Eke, and perhaps you know that actually the CEO of Spotify has pretty much the same name like I do.
One letter off.
I have one more letter, so I'm winning this game.
Yeah, definitely.
Although I'm actually, maybe since we're on the show, I have to ask you, like, how does he pronounce his last name? Do you know that? Like, I guess you
just
should.
Eke.
Eke. Yeah, that's interesting because it has this like sound, and in my case, it's just Eke. So it's also similar to the Finnish pronunciation. So people are.
To me, as a Swede, it looks like, this is probably a Finnish name.
And the funny part was that when I relocated here, people were first talking to me in Finnish, just because they assumed that I'm from the Nordics due to my blonde hair. So back then I didn't speak Finnish, so I just told them, sorry, I don't speak Finnish. So they switched to Swedish, and that was a little bit awkward.
It's very nice of them, but
but now I feel comfortable with my basic Finnish knowledge, so I don't have to say it anymore. Works out. And it actually feels like I'm home here now, so it's pretty good. And I completed the university here, and I worked in several like smaller startups, and I was also working on a bunch of these self-published applications in the meantime. Mm-hmm. So these some of my applications that we are going to talk about today, they've been published in 2014 already. So next year they're going to have their 10-year-old anniversary.
That's weird.
And like 2014 was around the time when I was in the middle of my bachelor studies, and I had a lot of free time. So I was listening to some of these lectures, and the mathematical part were like sometimes difficult, but the programming was so easy that I just listened to some like talks about some algorithms, and then I took my computer and I implemented some of them. I tried them out in my software, and then some of them got published, and it's been on the App Store for almost 10 years now.
That's a while.
Yeah.
Which one is the oldest one?
The oldest one is Handstract. I don't know if you tried that one before.
No, I haven't tried it.
Because I remember you mentioned that you looked into Centroid and ferromagnetic. So I can maybe talk a little bit about that.
Yeah.
So Handstract is another iOS application, and that one is, I think it's always going to stay a mobile application because it's based on multi-touch gestures. So the way it works is that it's kind of like a vector graphics editor, but the main idea about it is that you don't draw lines like the way you would draw it with a mouse, but instead you use your hand as a polygon. So the more fingers you put down, the more vertices of the polygon will have. And that way you can make like these really unique shapes just with your hand.
Yeah.
And I think it works really nice on an iPad where you have this large screen, and then pretty much you can do this like vector graphic finger painting, the way I call it. And this was actually, the most popular one. So in 2018, this actually got featured by Apple, and I think that's pretty much the biggest achievement from these self-published applications that I had. And that's also interesting because in 2014 I had a lot of time with my bachelor studies, and in 2018 I was right in between the bachelor's and master's, so I had time again. And like you could see the connection here that when you have time to do some stuff, then you can also achieve a bit more success with those. So in that year, in 2018, I was adding a bunch of new features, and Apple got the attention about Handstract, and they reached me out to feature it in some Eastern regions. So one of them was China, and the other one was Russia. So the way it works is that they request assets from you, like some marketing materials, and they make this post on the front page of the App Store. And I got a bunch of downloads afterwards, so it was like a really unique thing. Yeah. And
really cool.
Like this is also, I think, one of the struggles with these self-published applications, that you can make something which is like interesting, and like primarily I'm making them for myself so I can experiment with an idea or make some like art pieces. But in the end, if you want to make money with them, you need to reach a lot of people, and that's something that that makes it like a lot harder if you really want to like invest time and money in that.
Yeah, that's true.
So this type of marketing boost, for example, that Apple featured this application, that makes a huge difference. So on that couple of weeks when it was featured, I got, I think, like pretty much like 100 times more downloads compared to normal cases. And so normally it's actually pretty hard to make money and hard to reach people. So I feel like that there's not even really like easy recipe of making these applications successful. Like you kind of have to expect that on its own, it's not going to work out that much. So, for example, like you can make a really cool application, but if you don't reach people, then it's not going to make money. And there are all kind of ways to do that. So you can try to make it viral. You can try to advertise it on your own, but then like we are technical people, so like managing all the marketing stuff can be pretty difficult.
Yeah, that's not the part that excites us.
Yeah. I was just talking with some of my colleagues about what my plans are related to ferromagnetic, for example. And I know that people are interested in music visualizers, but currently, like organically from the App Store, I only got like around 200 downloads a month, and it's a freemium application. So. To actually make money with that, you need to convince those people to pay for it. And this is also something that I'm pretty proud of, that from the 200 people, around 15 to 20% are actually converting to pay.
That's really high.
That's surprisingly high. I think it's also because the pro version currently it only costs like $1. So that's not the steep price to pay. And
no, it's very generous.
Well, I'm also planning to add more stuff in the future and try to maybe like split it into tiers, so you could pay more if you want to get more features or support the development more. And but overall, the problem is that if I only have like 200 downloads, then even if I get everyone to pay, it's not going to be like enough to retire.
No.
So this is currently the bottleneck, that it's hard to reach people. And so I was talking with my friends and coworkers, and people are suggesting that I should do some kind of like directed marketing, maybe on TikTok or like popular social media channels. But for me, it's like it's so difficult because I'm so out of touch with people who are using TikTok and this type of activities. So that's
I mean, it's every time you try something like that, it's also the thing of having to build an audience there.
Yeah.
I mean, you can make a video. That's work enough, but then you have to get people to see it. So it's the same thing again. Finding the audience.
That's true. I used to actually have some more activity on Instagram. I think I haven't posted there pretty much in 4 or 5 years now. But when I was more active, that had a visual impact on the downloads. So
cool.
It's actually even turned out that I had some kind of like a follower base. So there were people who were using my applications to generate art, and they were sharing it with each other. And in some cases they requested features, and in other cases, what I found even more interesting is that they combine the output of the images with other applications. So it becomes something like even more than what my applications can produce. Hand tracked is clear. So you can create vector graphics with your hand. You can create these polygons and like abstract shapes. And I think actually the name is pretty self-describing. So the other application we talked about with you is Centroid, which is another vector graphic application, but that one is based on photographs. So you can import photos, or you can use it as a live camera to create pixelated like images. But they are also, instead of just splitting them to pixels, you can also turn them into a polygon mesh. So for example, it actually uses some edge detection, so it can find some of the objects on the images and then turn them into this like polygon mesh. And I think in both of these applications, one of the coolest things is that it produces a vector graphic output. So you can export it as a PDF, scale it up. You can use it for marketing materials or art projects. And I actually heard some feedback that people were using these as posters. So imagine that you have a low quality photo, or you just have a part of a photo which you would like to use it as let's say as a logo or a symbol for something, or a piece of an advertisement on a poster. Then you can take a photo with Centroid, turn that into this polygon mesh. Of course, it will be stylized, but afterwards you can scale it up and use it in your art project. And so these two applications are meant to create content, basically. So it can be used as a graphic design tool, and currently they are available on iOS and iPad. But for Centroid, I'm also planning to create a macOS version a bit later on. That's one of the future plans that I'm thinking about, because like technically these applications all use just Swift under the hood, and it's surprisingly easy to port these between platforms from Apple, because most of these graphic tools are available in all of their platforms the same way you would have it on iOS or on macOS. And so the third application is Ferromagnetic, which you started with, and that's pretty much the latest software that I was working on my own, and that's a music visualizer, as you mentioned, and that one is by default it was designed for macOS originally, but it's also available on iOS, and tvOS version is it's pretty much already in the beta, but it's not published yet, so it's something that's coming up. Like I think cool. Like Apple TV is a perfect platform for that. Like you can just put these huge visuals on a TV and have it running in the background for a party. That was kind of my idea in the beginning, that I want to have something in our living room TV to synchronize with the music and then look cool.
Yeah. Oh, so is that why? Because I think the one of the main things early versions did was like listen to music through like a microphone.
Yeah,
that makes a lot of sense for that use case.
Yeah, so audio input is very tricky. As you have noticed, like there's not that many of these applications, and actually the earliest version for Ferromagnetic, it was based on an open source idea. There is another music visualizer which was called as KaleidoSync, and I think they renamed it to something else. I didn't really follow the project that much, but one of the inspiration came from them, because what they did is that they took this audio analysis API from Spotify, and what they did is that they took that song analysis that comes from this API, and they synchronize the playback from Spotify with that. So they don't actually listen to music. They get information about the volume and the tone of the song through this high-level analysis, and then you can try to sync that up with the music itself. It's kind of like backwards, like
it's a surprising way around.
Yeah, and so this has a lot of limitations, and I'm trying to move away from this. So first of all, the biggest limitation is that you will only get information about songs which are on Spotify, and they have a large enough library, but like a lot of customers for Ferromagnetic are using Apple Music, and in some cases, it could be that the title of the song is slightly different, or maybe you have a live version or a radio edit of a song, and so it won't actually sync up with the same song that you could get from Spotify. Plus, it's also not giving you enough data for really detailed visualizations. Spotify gives you like a sample of the volume at given time frames, and some of these like high level details about the tone and some properties of the songs, but it's not a continuous data. It's only some data points at certain slots in the song, and what you need to do is to interpolate between those, which looks fine for most cases. But if you have a song with very high tempo or like frequent pitch changes, then it won't really sync that much up with that. So I actually found that with this type of setup, if you're synchronizing with data from Spotify, the best thing is to listen to slow songs. They work pretty nice with that. But that's very limiting. Plus, you need internet connection to download the songs, and you need to synchronize it in a immersive way. And there are actually some other like interesting things about this API. I recommend people to look into that. So, for example, it also gives you score about how danceable the song is, and some like high level analysis. But it's also like not properly documented, and I think the reason is because they probably use it for some internal purposes, and sometimes even their API is not available, so they can have some outages. So in that case, like my application would be fully offline. But so this was pretty much the original inspiration. But since then, what I've been doing is that I'm trying to detach myself from this and try to use some alternative audio input sources. And as you mentioned, like one of them is microphone. So that's pretty clear. You can analyze a song in real time if you have a microphone connected to the either to a computer or to the iPhones or like iOS devices in general. And that also has some limitations because, for example, on iOS you cannot have music playback and microphone recording at the same time. So
that's
so
annoying.
Yes, on macOS you can have it, although it can sometimes cause some glitches. So that's another issue. But because of this, I was still looking into some other techniques, and luckily there are some more stuff, even though these are not like fully universal solutions. So that's why the application itself has a bunch of audio sources, and you can select between those. And I need to get some guidance in which situation, like which to use in which situation. But anyway, so on macOS, the problem is pretty much solved these days because, and this is also a new thing. So it's not really used by other audio visualizers at the moment. But Apple added system level recording to macOS. Actually, sorry for jumping around, but
no problem.
So,
no problem.
So this API, you could already record pretty much like you could record the screen of the system on macOS since a couple of years ago already.
Mm-hmm.
But only last year they added to the latest macOS version a way to record audio from the system, because previously you could have done like a screen recording and record microphone at the same time, but
it's still not the system audio.
Yes. And with this API change, they relaxed this restriction. So, they always had access to system audio. It's just about like how much access do they give through their official APIs to developers. But this is pretty much solved now. So on macOS, if you use the latest version of Ferromagnetic, you can choose the system audio source. The only limitation is that it's going to show you that the application is recording the whole system, and that can be like scary to some users. But that's pretty much how things work. So like the downside there is that it also records to other audio sources, which actually it could be considered as an upside. So for example, you could use your own like studio software, for example, when you're editing a podcast audio, and you can also turn it into a visualization if it makes any sense.
I mean, I'm using it right now, and I mean, it produces beautiful visuals from our conversation.
Okay, that's very reassuring. So that works, and I'm super happy about this because this API change from Apple, it pretty much makes it possible to make this type of audio visualizers in a natural way, so you don't have to use this type of loopholes. And but the thing is not that easy on iOS yet, and neither on tvOS. So on iOS, there's actually a similar API that can record system audio. This is also like a relatively new thing, but that one is called as it's this replay kit on iOS. Which
I heard the name.
Yeah, so that was originally meant for video games. So you could create live streams from your from your games to some providers. For example, Twitch or YouTube can use this to capture the gameplay and stream it to another service. And interestingly, this also doesn't just record the application which you're in, but the whole system audio. So if you have some microphone input or something else, you can do a recording and stream it into this service while you're inside the game or another third-party application. And this is also system-wide. So that's pretty nice. So in theory, it works great. And it actually solves the issue with... You can play music in Spotify, and this screen recorder plugin will transfer it to Ferromagnetic, and you will have nice visuals. The problem is that if you do this with Apple Music, they have some kind of system level DRM protection. So you can have the plugin running, but it will be always quiet. So it won't produce any sound input. So for Apple Music on iOS, there are still like no easy solutions as far as I know.
That's so annoying.
Yeah. And even this plugin has some, like, even without that, it's slightly annoying, because every time you turn it on or every time you open the application, you get a system level dialog where the user has to give permission for the application to record the system, which is fair.
Yeah, I guess so.
It has to be like opt-in.
Yeah.
But it requires one extra touch every time you launch it, this feature. Yeah. So yeah, there are some interesting loopholes still. And also, like, this audio analysis API that I mentioned from Spotify, they produce a format which technically it's pretty easy to modify. So you don't necessarily need Spotify to create this audio analysis. So technically, if you have enough access to these databases, you can make your own audio analysis. And let's say that you have a song that you created as an artist. You could share it in a system where they would create these analyses and then only share those with the visualizer software. So you wouldn't necessarily need to use Spotify's service to do this. Actually, even Spotify uses open source technology that I could share later in a link, but which was originally meant to do this type of like high level analysis on the songs. But so this kind of gives just an overview about like how difficult it is to like access audio in general.
Yeah,
and so that's I think it's actually pretty much just like the tip of the iceberg. So because like eventually you will get some kind of audio information, and then the next thing is that I had to create visuals for it.
Yep.
So originally I mentioned this was started as a macOS application, and this is something I would recommend for everyone who is starting out with their own hobby projects or side projects, is to, even if you're making it for a mobile platform, you should start with a desktop version, especially because these days the line between these like desktop applications and mobile applications is pretty thin. So the biggest difference there is the user interface. So on macOS, you won't have touch-based input yet,
no.
But all the rendering logic is shared between the platforms, and it makes it super convenient to work with. So, for example, if I'm working on a new visualizer, a new visual effect, I could just write the code on macOS and then deploy it on iOS later on, and it will automatically work.
Yeah.
And it's also like a lot quicker to iterate with changes. So on iOS, you would need to install the application. You would need to use a simulator or something to interact with it, and it's a little bit more like convoluted. But on macOS, you can just launch the application. It pretty much takes like a couple of seconds, and then it will already run as a native window, and then you can interact with it even with keyboard shortcuts, and it makes it super easy to test and debug stuff.
I guess you have to think a bit more about the resource usage, perhaps, on the phone.
Yeah, that's for sure. So, for example, like even right now, I was looking into ways to improve the frame rate. That's by the way actually like connected to my day job. Like we haven't mentioned this, but I currently work at Mapbox, and in Helsinki they have the team for the maps rendering group. And our day-to-day activities is pretty much related to the performance of the map and and the pre-processing of the data. So it's very much in line with what I'm doing in my free time. Yeah, like maybe like a little bit of advertisement allowed here. If you're also recruiting in that office, it's also not far from you, so you could just drop by.
Work on cool graphics performance.
Yeah. And so because of this, I'm super excited about like fine tuning, rendering and making things use your like whole device capabilities. And I think it's also like an interesting thing that these days we have these pretty much like supercomputers in our pocket. So like even if you just compare it to like 10 years ago, like
it's incredible.
Like a desktop computer didn't have this much processing power. And it even feels like that most of the software on mobile is underutilizing these. So that's one thing that I really like about computer graphics, is that you can pretty much like use the whole capability of the phone, at least from the processor point of view.
Yeah.
So because of this, I was looking into adding more and more visual effects and trying to render it in like higher resolution. There are still some like hiccups sometimes, but it's mostly just because I didn't have time to fix them all. This is also another big struggle with these self-published applications, is that you need to find some time and balance it next to your day job. And that's something that in some cases I wouldn't even recommend to people to do, because it's super tiresome to sit a couple more hours during the weekends, and it can strain your eyes. Maybe if you're already doing some activity in front of a computer, like for example if you're playing games, then you can consider that spending the time on a hobby project would be more valuable. And and I swear that it can even be like as rewarding, because when you get feedback from customers, or when you get a nice review, or when you hear like how people use your software, then it feels like that you actually achieve something compared to just playing through a game or getting higher on a leaderboard. Those things are not that unique in my opinion, but well, it depends.
It depends a lot what you have the energy for as well. But it's definitely about finding motivation and finding a way to enjoy it as well, I think.
That's for sure. And it's also something that if you're already doing something like this in your day job, then you can utilize that knowledge to make something which can even like go beyond your daily tasks. Because like sometimes like when you're working, you're limited to that specific area where they need your expertise. So well, right now it's actually like super interesting to work on these performance improvement topics at work, but for example, like you don't get that much visibility about the product design or like the business behind it. So if you're making your own application, even if it doesn't make that much money, you will still see all the decisions and the weight of the decisions that you're doing. So I'm sometimes trying like different price points, or trying to reach audience from different channels, and it actually has like a huge effect, even with some slight changes, and even if I only have like a couple hundred downloads. So it's an interesting learning experience, something that you wouldn't get easily from a larger company.
No, that's true. You get to see all the things, and you can dig into any part that you find interesting and experiment.
And there are also these type of like surprising like feedback that you sometimes get. Like for example, like ferromagnetic was used in an art exhibition in the US, and I didn't even know about it. They just asked me that, hey, could you maybe make some changes that it could launch automatically in full screen, because we want to put it on a display where they showcase it for a bunch of people in a showroom. And of course, like it took me like it took me like 2 hours to add this feature. And actually, like I get all kind of requests similar to this, where they just want me to add like some control buttons to do this or that, and it's fine to do. And there's also like even on my list, there's a lot of these things that, hey, maybe I should make the canvas size customizable in Handstract, or like some people were asking for recording videos from Centroid. And on ferromagnetic, I have like so many requests I can't even keep track of that. And they, like these things, it's interesting because these are all pretty much low hanging fruits. Like, okay, maybe the video recording part is not that much, but like slight changes in the software, it could be done in like one weekend. The problem is that it's hard to prioritize those, and they also don't really make that much difference in the product. So instead, what I'm trying to focus on is to add features which are like technically difficult to achieve. So, for example, like reading system audio, because most of these music visualizers, they don't do that, or maybe they could do it, but they don't follow the latest news based on these like API changes, or for example, like adding visualizers which are hard to write manually, or like processing data in a way, like for example in Centroid, like I was working a lot on to make this polygon mesh generation real time from the video, and I know that this requires some technical knowledge, which is not as easy to achieve if you're just an indie developer. No. And if you have like the technical expertise, these can actually make difference in your product. And I actually got these comments later on that people were saying that, okay, this is the only application which can do this, and that's why I'm using it. And that feels super nice. And it also kind of like something that can make you proud as a craftsman.
Definitely. Yeah, I mean, it really looks incredible. You just hold up the camera and everything is live in polygons.
And I worked on that for like, I worked on that thing around like 6 years ago already. And unfortunately, I didn't really have that much time to improve like the core engine. But it's also mostly because I was spending most of my time on ferromagnetic in the last couple of years. And it's hard to maintain like more than 2 applications.
Absolutely.
But there's one trick, and this is another recommendation that I could give for people who are thinking about like similar self-published software, is to try to share as much code as you can, and not just between the platforms, but also between the applications. So for example, I made this type of shared Swift library, which is used by, like it's used on inside Handstrike, Centroid, and in all 3 platform versions of ferromagnetic. And I'm also planning to edit for the Mac version of Centroid. So that's already 6 different applications which will use the same shared library.
And big payoff.
Yes, and what it does is that it elevates all these like recurring things that you would need to do on the platform. So for example, in-app purchase, like that's such a pain still, like especially verifying that the purchase goes through, and handling all the fallbacks, describing the errors, and querying the new packages and stuff like that, or
testing stuff.
Or for example, accessing some permissions from the system. If you want to get permission for microphone or camera or photo library, you need to make this access flow, not just in the code, but also visually. So you need to pop up some windows and ask for permission for this and that. And in every time you need to do a bit of customization. So there's a different workflow on iOS, Android, and tvOS, macOS. So all of these things like take so much effort that I feel like that most of these hobby developers spend their time on managing this type of permission flows and like all that secondary things. Like they create some value, but it doesn't really create the core value of your application.
No, it's like you said, it's not like taking the time to solve that hardware problem and getting a big difference in experience.
So like that's also something that if I look at the timeline now on ferromagnetic, I think I worked on it around 3 years now, and I think like getting the first visualizer up and running, it was like 1 month of work. And then for half a year, I was adding all kind of like permission checks and like the UI to select this and that, to describe the licenses and privacy policy and there's all kind of stuff. But because I'm using this shared library between these applications, most of these things are elevated. So now that I done the struggle with the in-app purchase, like handling, for example, I could use the same workflow in my other 2 applications, and that makes things super, super easy. Plus, it's also easier to test because you can just test that module, and it will verify that if you're fixing one bug, it will fix it in all those 3. So
big improvement.
Yeah, and so this is actually one of the things that I think it's a nice tip to follow. And there's all kind of other stuff that you can do if you're doing some hobby development. So I think it's very important to follow the news. Like you could read about these new APIs and new techniques that can fully improve your user experience. And for example, there's all kind of techniques. Like I think you were curious about like how do I put ferromagnetic into the background to be used as a wallpaper on macOS. Yeah, and that's you know, it's one of these type of tricks that I was first looking into some like more direct techniques. So the first version of that was kind of like a frame by frame stream into the background to set the output of the rendered frame as a wallpaper image. And it actually surprisingly worked, but this is not how it is in the final product. It had some downsides. For example, if you stop the application, it was always the last image which was displayed there, and you also had to pretty much guarantee that you will have around like 60 frames replaced in your wallpaper, which was, for some reason, it was like using way more system resources, and it was spinning up my CPU a lot. But I think it's because changing the wallpaper has some other side effects. For example, on macOS there are these like system level blurs which are based on your wallpaper. Maybe that was also like re-triggered every time. So
like forcing everything to redraw at 60.
But there are other ways, and the recommendation here is to, if you feel like that you're struggling with something, you have to look around, because other people have run into these things. And especially in open source software, if you know about that some softwares are doing this, then you can look into how they did it. And in this specific case, it was actually the VLC player which did the same thing, where they could put the playback video as a background image. And the way they did it is that they kind of use the undocumented API from Apple. So the trick is that you actually put a window in the background, but you don't just put it as a like a normal window you would create on macOS, but you also have to set it to position which is behind pretty much behind every UI component, even behind your desktop icons. And this part is not exactly documented. So there are some levels for setting the application like back and back, but this specific level, which is behind your icons and in front of your wallpaper image, that was not part of the official API. But somehow at VLC they figured this out. You could reuse the same hack and it will pretty much look like a background image, but it's actually just a video without buttons, without everything, full screen rendering on top of your desktop. So that's, I think, pretty clever. And you could find similar examples, like if you're looking for a problem.
It's wonderful when you're able to figure out something like that as well.
And I had actually like a similar story with this system audio recording on iOS. Mm-hmm. So I mentioned that I'm using this plugin to listen to to capture audio from other applications when ferromagnetic is running. Yep. And that plugin is a separate system extension that you're launching from the application. And this is like, so far, this is all like normal. But when you're stopping your application, you also have to shut that down. Or for example, when you're switching between modes. So let's say that you want to right now listen to the music playing from Spotify and then apply these system level visualizations on it. You select this mode, but when you select another one, obviously we don't need to record to the system anymore, so I can stop that. The problem is that for some reason, if you want to stop this extension right now, you would need to throw an error from it. And what this triggers is that it creates a system level window on iOS, which tells the customer that this extension was stopped for reasons. Mm-hmm. And so some other smart people at Telegram figured out that this is kind of like a limitation of the API from Apple, but it wasn't limited in Objective-C. So this system extension is written in Swift, but in the Telegram application, when they stop this recording from the extension, they call an Objective-C code to stop the extension without an error. And I'm so proud that they found this, because otherwise it was such a struggle. So overall the main takeaway is to look into some open source projects, especially if you know that they do this in their program, and you know that they do it in a way that it doesn't produce the same user experience that was not ideal.
Yeah.
So yeah, they might have some smart solutions that you can learn from.
Yeah.
So,
take inspiration from everywhere.
I was also thinking to talk a little bit about like generative art in general.
Yeah.
Because like if you're looking at these three applications, the common denominator between all three is that they produce something visual, and it's I could call this as creative coding, which is something that was always so exciting for me.
Yeah.
And I even had some other applications doing stuff like this, but in the end it was too much to maintain, so I was focusing on just these three.
Yeah.
And
that's a lot.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's already like too much sometimes to keep up to date. So yeah, this is probably like the hardest part when you're working on your own software, that you don't always know like how much time you can spend on it. And actually funny like detail is that if you're looking at the amount of releases I'm doing, and I was also looking at the pools of my own GitHub repository, I could see that most of the contribution is done in around February, which is probably like the worst part of the year in Finland. Like, it's so dark, cold, and like everything is covered with ice. So yeah. So that's probably like the best time to work on your own project, unless you're traveling somewhere.
yeah. I mean, especially if it's nice and visual like this.
Yeah,
get some light and color in February.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, we even have some art festivals here where they use some projection mapping to use similar software where they generate some art and then project it on a side of a building, or they make art installations which use some generated code to do something which looks cool. Like in some cases they have reasonings, but honestly I think sometimes it just needs to look cool, and you don't necessarily need all that background information to enjoy it.
No.
So that's something that I very much enjoy. I also like to make my own little prototypes. Like at home, like I have some smart lights which I was trying to control also with ferromagnetic. So technically, like because it's a native application on iOS, you can connect it to the HomeKit API, and you can set the lights or the colors of the light bulbs based on whatever is the current color for the song that's playing. So there's this like kind of like multi-dimensional integration you can do, which is
really cool.
Yeah, super interesting. It's just, well, I still have to add like official like support for this, but the ideas are there.
yeah.
And so that's really what I like about just working on these projects, that it creates something which visually stunning, and it can be something that can be interactive. It can surround you.
Yeah.
So it's something that is not really easy to do with traditional art forms. Like
no, that's true.
Yeah, actually, before programming, I was studying graphic design and painting, and I still paint. And when I think about painting and about these digital techniques, I try to create things which you cannot do with either one of those. So then that's, I think, also something which defined the modern art movements, that photography was invented, and then people got scared that it's not worth to do photorealistic paintings anymore. So people started to make these abstract and surreal and weird looking paintings which people couldn't produce with photography.
Yeah.
So now I think we are in a similar point where we have digital tools to create like this crazy images, especially with AI. You can create like surreal images based on a prompt. You can even create videos with that. Pretty much you can create everything that you can imagine. Although one thing which is missing, and that's what I like about painting, is that you can have texture and depth on a 2D surface, which might actually change with like more of this like new wave VR or AR headsets. But but it's really hard to replicate that. So you need pretty much to simulate all the physical properties of paint and light and create those type of textures that you would be able to do with manual paintings. So that's something that I like to like think about from this traditional and digital art, like from the perspective of those techniques, that you can create certain things with that, and that tool is perfect for that, and you should learn about the things that you cannot do with the other tools. So for example, like you can pretty much create like a super nice looking scenery with digital art or AI or just by drawing them, like with some Illustrator tools. But you can do so much more, like you can make interactive art, you can make stuff which reacts in music, like ferromagnetic, or you can make stuff where you take a photo and then split it into polygons. And, like things which need some automation, and I think that's one of the key feature there. Yeah. And the other interesting thing about it is that it's also scalable and reusable. Mm-hmm. So you can take visual effects and combine them. That's why I was so impressed that some of these users that I saw on Instagram, they were using some other photo editing tools to apply these post-processing effects. Like for example, they actually use some tools, and I liked it really much, that was adding some generated grains or textures on top of images that were created with hand-struck or Centroid. Yeah. So because those tools are creating this type of clean vector graphic images. Yep. So if you add some grain on top of that, or maybe some unique textures, then it turns it into something which looks more realistic and more natural in a way. So,
a whole different thing.
Yeah. And that's also something which is I'm still planning to improve in the future. So for example, I used to have this application that was meant to be used together with Handstruct and Centroid, which was a photo editor. And the reason why I discontinued it is because it wasn't adding too much extra. So it was adding some post-processing effects, maybe some textures in some cases, but it was pretty much just the same regular photo editor you would use in your like daily photo editing workflows. Yeah. But one of my plans is to bring this back in a way that it would be part of the application itself, and it would be something where you can choose how different stages of the art will look like. So for example, if you're using Centroid, you could specify like what type of effect do you want to apply on the main subject on the image, and what do you want to apply in the background. And one way we can do that is that Apple also has this depth information about the photos now, not just because of the portrait mode, but also because they have all kind of machine learning tools to figure out what is the foreground and background of the image. And this is something that it's like a couple of years ago, it wouldn't have been that easy to do, but now the platform gives you this information. So imagine that you could take this photo, you get the background content separately, you turn that into one type of polygon, like you can turn it into like hexagons, for example, and the foreground can be made up of triangles, and it can be like a different type of
it's so cool.
Mesh. So, and my plan is also not just to separate these based on the depth information, but also to apply different post-processing effect on those, and that would make pretty much the best use of these like technologies that pretty much you already have on the phone. So like again, like using all the given tools which are there. It's just like most applications are not fully utilizing them.
Yeah, and it makes a lot of sense to integrate in the application as well, because you can use them at sort of stages inside of it rather than just on top afterward.
And this type of depth that could be used in those is also going to be relevant when the new Apple VR headset will be released, because everything will be around like the Z-axis. So suddenly everything will have depth, and I'm super curious to see how I could port ferromagnetic.
I can't stop thinking about it now.
So you could have like this full 3D visual experience, and I can honestly tell you that this is also probably the biggest target audience, because from what I see, people who love music visualizers, they just love to be immersed by it, like also funny fact that I do get some anonymous information from the software about the type of music that people are listening to. And currently the number one artist is Pink Floyd. Probably also not surprising. So
it makes some kind of sense.
But this is, like super valuable information for me, because I can just look into the songs that people like, and I can play it back, see how it looks, and fine tune it for those. Yeah. So I was even
awesome
thinking,
feedback loop.
Yeah, I was even thinking about having this type of song of the day feature where like a flow of visualization would be made around that specific song. Because, like currently the whole stuff is randomized, and the randomization has some downsides, because you will see some repetition, and it can be also like a little bit like boring after a while. But I'm still like super proud of like how this randomization is implemented right now, because you've probably seen that the application has these layers and some post-processing effects where it turns things into kind of like a kaleidoscope or like into a grid, and it has now particle effects and some fractals and stuff like that. But the way it's connected together under the hood is that I defined all these type of visuals that you can have, and I just made a combinatorial mixture of all of those. So let's say that I have 10 different effects and 3 layers, or you can select like 3 things which are combined, and all of those will generate these scenes, and those scenes are always random. So I don't even know which scene is going to be rendered when I start the application. So this is great because it creates a lot of variation. But of course, like you will also see the repetition there. And that's why I was thinking about this like song of the day feature, where I could kind of fine tune that it wouldn't be so random. So, for example, if you're listening to a song which has a quiet beginning and it slowly builds up, then I could make it so that it will be still somewhat random, but at least the beginning of the song, it will have a little bit like smoother effects, which are not that aggressive. And then it would get more complex and complex as the song progresses. So there's pretty much just infinite amount of ideas.
I mean, and that's kind of it's an exciting feature, because it's also something that could make like people come back and have another look and like, let's see what happened this time.
Imagine that you could maybe, for example, record a song and then make a specialized visualization with ferromagnetic for that. I already got some requests like this that people were asking that, can I actually make like a YouTube video with your software about my song? And I was like, sure, like please just maybe put a link to it or something, because that would be super helpful. But but overall, like I think like user generated content and overall like content that people add to their software, it's still making a huge difference, even if you have like really good procedurally generated stuff.
I mean, it's fun to imagine being able to like affect the visualizer or something like that in the case of ferromagnetic.
And that's it's part of this same idea that I'm having. So that if we are going to have like daily customized songs that you could share with users, then we also need an editor for that, right? So like we would need to have some kind of toolkit inside the software to produce those, and then other people could produce their own like customized songs. And again, I think like the ideas are relatively cheap, but implementing them, that's just takes some time. And and this is also not something which is technically difficult. It's more about designing it, implementing it, having the free time, and
exactly
ownership on the software that you're working on. So I had a couple experiences when I released something and it was crashing like right after it got published on the App Store, and so that makes you a lot more careful if you know that even like small changes can break the whole software. So especially when the whole software is in your hand, it makes you more cautious and also a bit more aware of the whole system. So I work with some people who don't have any type of hobby projects, and sometimes they just focused on their like silos, but they don't really care that much about the whole system, like those people who are working on these like their own individual projects.
Yeah.
And like on the other hand, for working on your own stuff can also have some like carelessness.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah, I can just throw this out there and see what happens.
Yes, and for example, like if you know that you're the only developer working on the project, you can make some hacks.
Yep.
And this can be actually a really good thing, because hacks can help you to progress quickly. So for example, like one of the common theme in my applications is that I keep pretty much everything as a static object. And that can be dangerous. And if you would review a code like that at work, I wouldn't even accept it from other people. But no. Especially if you're working in a SDK, which is integrated by other developers, you can mess up memory management and stuff like that. Oh, but yes. if you're prototyping and making like a application on your own as a hobby project, then like the main thing is that you need to save time. And one way to save time is to don't think too much about like the ownership model and the memory management, and you can just create global objects. And it doesn't necessarily messes up your code, because you can still have some patterns where you access certain stuff through an interface. So for example, in my applications, I made this type of pattern, which is, maybe it actually has a name, but I keep all the static objects in a single class. So if I need to elevate something, or if I need to remove a component, I can just delete it from that interface, so it wouldn't actually deeply connect it with everything else. So it has some like ugliness to it, but it speeds up the development a lot.
Yeah, that's definitely worth doing.
Yeah,
I mean, I think I'm generally in favor of like finding solutions that really support the project at hand.
Yeah,
I mean, just because there's one best practice everyone talks about doesn't mean that it applies when I'm doing my own project by myself. And these parts I always keep in my head, and these other parts are important too.
That's exactly true. Like it can be also that you could use some existing solutions which can produce what you want, and then think about maybe like replacing it with something else later on. For example, like recently I added these particle effects to ferromagnetic, and most of the visual effects which were already there, they were handwritten metal shaders, but this particle effect is actually using the Scene Kit framework from Apple, and that one has like a built-in particle system, and it's mind-blowingly good. I recommend it for everyone. Cool. Like it even has a visual editor in Xcode, so you could just add like particle emitters, and then you can see how it looks in 3D space. It's like
that's perfect.
Yeah, like this is another interesting tip for people, that you would be surprised like how much cool visual tools and or audio editor tools are available just in the system that you're using already. So Apple has added so much stuff, and I'm pretty sure it's the same case on Android, also on desktop platforms. So it's worth to look into the documentation and find that can you do what you want to achieve with some existing tools. And this particle effect, particle system that Apple has, it's definitely one of those. Although, again, this is about the same topic, that you want to progress quickly, and then you need something to achieve your goals. And this is perfect for the time being. But for example, if I want to customize it more, and I want to, for example, like have some like very unique combination of those with the other existing visuals, then I might have to think about elevating it and maybe using like a custom particle system, because it already has some slight limitations. But for the time being, I think it's perfect, and it's super easy to just mix it with the existing code.
Yeah, just not get like too connected to it in case it becomes a problem in the future.
And it can be actually like these type of connections were already an issue in some other cases. So even if you don't use any dependencies, for example, I mentioned that those other two applications I started in 2014, and that was still like Objective-C era. Like, I'm not even sure like when was Swift originally released, but it was around that time. And
yeah, somewhere around there.
But even if it was like already released not long time after that, it was still not production ready.
No, definitely.
Yeah, the first 2-3 versions of Swift were having so many breaking changes. Yeah. And I actually run into issues with that because I remember that I started to add like a color editor view to Handstruct, and I had to scratch the whole thing because I started to write the code in Swift, and it had so many breaking changes that it was easier to just rewrite it.
I used a library. I don't recall what it was for a Mac app, and I found that there were two branches of the library on GitHub, one for Objective-C and one for Swift. And the author had made like angry comments on the Swift branch, like, "No, this is just breaking all the time. I'm giving up this one. Use Objective-C instead." Yes, it was a tough time.
Well, yeah, that was valid. Now these days, Swift is stable enough. So I think it was around 2018 when I like pretty much migrated everything to Swift, and there were still some small changes afterwards, but it was a lot easier to adopt those. But then I also had another struggle in the 2-3 years ago when I was updating Centroid, because originally that was written like this rendering part was made with OpenGL. Apple decided that OpenGL is deprecated. Let's use Metal now, and for a while it was still like acceptable to have OpenGL as a part of your application, and it still works if you really want to use it, but it's getting to a point where the developer tools are not supporting it properly anymore. So for example, it has issues in the iOS simulator, and you cannot debug stuff easily. Like, it used to have a really good debug view in Xcode if you wanted to check like information about vertices and stuff like that, and now it's like fully unsupported. So if you use Metal, you get a lot better development tool support for it. So I had to migrate all the stuff from OpenGL to Metal, which was again a struggle. It took like a couple weeks, months, I don't know, but it's worth it. And these type of technologies, it seems like that they are stable for like 5 to 10 years even, or even more. Like if we believe that they will keep it as their main target for now. So that's also something that you have to expect, especially if you're working on a project for more than like 5-10 years. And this just makes it even more true that if you can avoid any kind of external dependencies, you should. I did use some stuff. For example, I was using this so-called Crashlytics for crash reporting, which was actually, I think even before that it was Fabric. Then it became Crashlytics. Then it became part of Firebase. Then
that's a long path.
Yes, so it was going around, and like the API was changing, which was actually super easy to adopt because it had a single entry point.
That's good.
But that's just like one of those dependencies. And then in other projects, I had bigger issues where I was using some binding generators for UI elements. This was actually on Android, but I just looked into this project, and last time I updated it was like around 3 years ago, and since then that dependency is fully like finished, so no one is maintaining it anymore. It's not supporting the latest Gradle or Android versions, so it's impossible to continue using that. And the problem in that case was that the whole application's UI was written with that. So it's crazy, and I'm happy that that project was discontinued because I just it was easy to give that up. But there are similar struggles with Swift UI on iOS, but at least that was also getting more and more stable in the recent years. So it's
it seems to be.
In small projects, that's another advantage, is that you don't really have that much UI elements. You don't really need to rewrite that much business logic, so you can still maintain it even if it has some breaking changes. And as I mentioned, I'm trying to share as much code as I can between them, so that makes the process a lot easier. And it's also getting improved in the recent years. So, for example, actually Swift UI, even if it has a lot of downsides and it's still not as mature as some people expected, the best part is that for ferromagnetic specifically, I made the UI purely in Swift UI, and it's shared with iOS, macOS, and also in tvOS.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it has the same buttons, same formatting on text and stuff like that. Although you have to write some custom action handlers to receive, for example, like mouse clicks or touch in some situations differently than what you would expect. So you still have to do some customization, but the fact that you can use the same UI declaration on macOS and iOS and tvOS, it's super convenient.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Especially, I think like here the bottleneck is tvOS, because that has like a remote control as a user input. So like
it's a whole different thing.
Yeah, if you're doing software like this, you always have to think about like the worst case, which is in case tvOS, and then try to work backwards with the UI. So things will be a lot easier on macOS after that with the mouse and everything.
Yeah, almost too easy.
Yeah, and you know, the one thing that's still keeping the tvOS release a bit back is also the login process, because I mentioned that I'm using an API from Spotify, but also from other sources to get this audio analysis for the songs. And there's like not really easy support for logins for any kind of services on tvOS at the moment. I think maybe like this is also something they have to look into, because it's always changing. Apple is always adding new content. I have to look into the latest WWDC presentations, but like the latest ones that I saw when I was starting this beta version was that you have to go through a lot of hoops to log in to any kind of service. So, for example, one way they do it is that they generate a QR code on the TV that you have to scan with your phone, which is connecting to a temporary session somewhere, which opens a window on your phone where you type in your credentials, and then meanwhile the tvOS application is waiting for the session to acknowledge that the login was successful. So, you know,
sounds like the easiest way to do it.
Yeah, or you can show like a keyboard there and type in all your details, but that might not even be possible, because if you're using some web-based authentication, you just simply cannot open a web browser on tvOS.
Oh yeah, that's
yeah, which is again like speaking about hacks, it's also not true. You can actually open a web browser on tvOS, but Apple will reject your application if you do that.
So I take that as a no.
Yeah. So we had like a office dashboard in one company where I was working, where we actually put like just a web browser page in a tvOS application because we wanted to display some data there. But like you can do these type of hacks if you don't want to publish your apps on the App Store. And it's actually good to know about them, because like if you're just doing something to solve a problem for yourself, like actually the systems from Apple can be not as limiting as on the App Store. And this is actually even more true for macOS, because on macOS you have some access to some content, for example, even system audio, like where you might need to install some additional driver to reroute it and stuff like that. Luckily, it's not needed anymore, but some other music visualizers were doing this, that you would need to have some third-party setup to extend the system and then get the audio through that. So, yeah, it's possible. Like I think especially macOS has a lot more possibilities than some people realize. But if you want to publish on the App Store, then you have to be like a good citizen.
Yeah. Yeah, but if you're doing your own dashboard, it's a whole different thing.
Yeah. And, you know, I also had a lot of really funny stories with app reviews since, like, as I mentioned, like almost 10 years of development with these applications. Like, it was so funny in some cases when I got a photo from an app reviewer from California that they tried to make a photo with Centroid, but then one button didn't load, but I saw their desk in this like pixelated way, and that verifies that they actually try it out. And that's super cool.
Yeah, that's actually really cool.
And in some cases, they catch crashes, and that was also super helpful.
Yeah.
But like overall, the whole app review experience is getting a lot better, because like 10 years ago, you sometimes had to wait 2 weeks to get a response. Now it's like, sometimes it's like 2 hours.
Yeah, it's a lot better.
Yeah, and that's also like a difference between macOS and iOS, that on macOS, the reviews are still taking a little bit longer. Like it can be like a couple of days, but on iOS, it's like pretty much instant. I'm fairly sure that they use some kind of like pre-screening process with some automation. They still up to this day, they still do manual testing, which is impressive. So
yeah,
I'm not saying that the yearly developer membership specifically worth it, but
no.
At least I see that the money is going to someone.
Yeah, exactly. You can tell someone is doing something, which is good.
Yeah. Oh, and also, like, if you're curious about like the money that these are making, well, you know, I like before the show we were discussing that, well, it's not making that much. And that's also something that I think I say to people: if you're willing to work on hobby projects, it's fine to accept that it might not make you like enough money to even just focus on it as a day job, or it maybe even like it could be like a passive income in the future, but you need to put a lot of work in that first, and it will take months where you will pretty much make no money.
Yeah.
So now, like, things are improving slightly, but it's still like I would phrase it in a way that it only makes me like 1 or 2 beers a week, which is like, it feels good to at least like pay for those super expensive Nordic beers. But
yeah, that's a lot of money actually.
Yeah, but well, it's not. Yeah, unfortunately, not that much still, and it's also it's seasonal, so. It depends on like for example, it's not just depending on the users themselves, but also like how often you publish updates. So for example, if I have more free time and I do more frequent updates, then it can double the amount of downloads and income. Or if I get some publicity, for example, through a podcast episode, you will see it in the download charts that it has an effect. And same goes with some like, just, you know, the word of mouth. Like some people might pick it up and recommend it to other people, and it works out. And the reason why I don't really stress too much about the money is because, first of all, it's a learning experience. Like I learned about so many interesting techniques and hacks, and I can manage my own product and learn about like how to even publish something and how to communicate with customers, which is also part of our job on a day-to-day basis, but you don't have the same level of ownership. You cannot really have the same level because you're working in a large team. Like sometimes you're working with hundreds of people. So with these applications, like, you can expect to gain a lot of like non-monetary value, like mostly from learning. Plus, the other thing is that it's kind of random sometimes. Like, you know, there are like hundreds of thousands or millions of applications on these app stores, and people are like sometimes randomly picking up stuff. I think like one of the most known example is, for example, Flappy Birds, which was another Swedish guy picked it up and became popular afterwards. And these things have this type of network effect around them, where the more people talk about it, the more downloads they get and the more popular they get. So they catalyze themselves. And it can happen at any time with any type of software. It doesn't even need to be that well made. I'm not saying that you should make well-made software, but for example, I had this colleague like around 8 years ago, and he made an application which was just like a fun little drinking game where you spin a wheel and it tells you how many shots you should drink. And it suddenly became like super popular in France, where a group of friends started to use it, and other people were sharing it with each other. And he made it in like 1 weekend, and he said that he didn't even expect that it will make like so much traction. So like, you know, things can be random.
Yeah.
that's why I think the main thing is that you need to have like a good base in your software, and then if it suddenly becomes super popular, then it can be like something that even in the current state you could be proud of, and like it could be something that is scalable. So that's why I'm always recommending to not use any type of backend services if you're a standalone developer, especially not something that you need to pay for like a monthly fee, unless it's the core value of your application, and if you get enough money from the customers to pay for it. So like, for example, if I would need to maintain a server to handle the logins or handle the sessions of the users, and suddenly it becomes like a hit, that couple dollars that I can make with the application is not going to pay for the rent of those services, or if it does, then you need to already prepare for those type of like spikes or unexpected success in a way. So it's there's a lot of dimensions to think about, and money is something that will, I think it comes with those type of like accidental successes if you reach that. But even if I won't make that much money with these 3 applications, I can imagine that I could use this experience to design a new software, and then maybe that will be more successful. And I feel like it can be actually more successful if I would spend this time on a video game. But for me, it's like I like creating art more than playing games. So it's just a personal preference.
Yeah, of course. I mean, and I feel like there will be something, some interesting next step, which you will be able to take based on these applications.
Yeah, for example,
it will create something that nobody else would have been.
For example, like VR could be something like that. Yeah. If Apple is able to pull off and this new VR headset in a way that it makes things more mainstream, then like these type of immersive art experiences could be something that might become even more popular. Although, it's like it's always random a little bit, but it's, in any case, like even like regardless of the money, it's something that I would still recommend for a lot of people to at least like have some hobby application to try to like where you can try out new techniques, you can experiment with stuff, and maybe you can learn about like why certain techniques are bad.
Of course,
because at work everyone is telling you not to use too many singletons or stuff like that, and then maybe you realize like why is that. Exactly. There's all kind of good ways to learn from these.
So when you try new stuff out, do you tend to do that as a like new little application on the side or inside of one of your existing applications?
It depends. I try to actually keep these inside the applications, because then I can publish those as updates, as new stuff. But lately I had a different approach, like and this also unfortunately makes it so that I don't publish that many updates for these apps. That what I'm doing these days is I try to make like self-contained little projects. So for example, I actually published on GitHub a small like home dashboard application, which tells me information about like the like temperature outside, the next bus in our nearest bus stop, and stuff like that. It's super handy. And this is actually not a product itself, but what you can think about it in a way that it's a hobby project which solves you a problem. So it's like, even if you don't want to publish something on the App Store, you can just like look into problems that are that you're doing on a day-to-day basis. For example, if I always miss the bus, then I need some ways to visualize it when it will come. And like, I'm actually surprised that most of the people who are really good developers, like most of them don't really have these type of side projects, even though it could be super valuable to do something. It's not just because of the learning experience, but also because you can save yourself time or fix your own problems. So,
I mean, I've been thinking about that for myself as well. I feel like seeing the potential for a little project to help yourself is sort of a skill that you need to learn. And some people are really good at it. Like, I automated this little thing and this little thing, and now I have one button press to do these 3 things that I do 4 times. And I'm more like, maybe I should automate this, but there's always this manual step in the middle. I might as well do it by hand this time.
That's true. And there's again, there's a surprisingly lot of tools to help you to do that. And as a programmer, like you should be able to think about everything in an abstract way. So it doesn't necessarily matter if you want to make like a whole software or just to automate like a tiny thing on your day-to-day life. So, for example, like I'm actually planning to make a small blog post about using shortcuts on iOS, which is
nice.
Like this now a system application that Apple has bought a couple of years ago from a third-party developer. And shortcuts, in my opinion, it's like one of the most amazing things about iOS, because you can make so many stuff that you can't even you didn't even know that you can do it with those. So like it's good to play around with that and think about like all the problems that you have, and then sometimes can turn out that you can solve it by them. So for example, I have this shortcut which sends a daily message in a WhatsApp group based on some quotes. And this is something that when I was first looking into the documentation of WhatsApp, it looked like that you would need to use your own web service to share messages. So you would need to use their API, get an API key, run a service somewhere, and then you can post these messages if you go through all the authorization. Instead, in shortcuts on iOS, you can just drag and drop a UI, which will take an input from a list of text that you want to share, and it can post it locally using your phone's built-in local communication methods with the applications. So it's you have to think about like things that you want to achieve. For example, sharing these messages in the groups, and then you can find some like super easy solutions if you look around in the platforms like existing tools. So
it's easy to think that I need to, I'm going to solve this, I need to write a script and put up a virtual machine somewhere, and no, maybe you can use a shortcut and just send it to WhatsApp.
I'm actually super impressed like how much stuff you can do with that, and it's even like you don't even have to write any code. It's just drag and drop UI. So it's an impressive tool.
It's one of those. I can't believe Apple is doing all this stuff.
And that's also like something which I find like important philosophical thing about being a programmer, that you're pretty much like creating some value out of nothing. Okay, not exactly nothing, because those APIs exist, but in these cases, like you can have a problem which could be solved just with a couple of lines of code or with this drag and drop shortcuts, and you suddenly created something just by thinking through the problem, right? So implementing it is just about like kind of describing it as a abstract solution, but the code itself is not really the main thing. It's about like thinking through how you could solve specific things with the given tools that you have. And it's also true, I think, for creative coding and digital art, that you want to see something on the screen, for example, like these visuals that move with sound. So you think through as a developer, like how you can access audio, how you can create visuals with, it could be pretty much any type of like visual or graphics API that you could use. You could use even the simplest ones. Like I'm telling people that you can pretty much just use SVGs, where you can manually generate like polygons and move it around with any type of code that you imagine. And then you put it on the screen, and you suddenly have something which is nice to look at. And you started with this idea, technically. And this is also something that I like. You can be proud of as a craftsman, that you produced value out of just thinking through an issue or like something that you want to achieve. For example, also like in the case of ferromagnetic, one thing I'm super proud of is the application itself is like 5 megabytes or smaller. So
awesome.
Yeah, it maybe uses a lot more memory during the runtime, but that's
that's a different
just
thing.
for the session. I'm also trying to keep it like low footprint so you can run it in the background, and then it wouldn't really take a lot of system resources.
Yeah. That's
yeah.
Well, fun things. Yeah, I guess we should start wrapping up a bit.
Yeah.
I feel like we've covered so much good stuff. Is there anything you want to add at the end?
Yeah, I'm thinking like it's also going to be super tiresome to spend some of your weekends on these projects. Even if you just have one like hobby project that you're developing, but there's like so many reasons why you should do it still. Like mostly, of course, the learning experience, but even within the learning experience, like there are differences because at work you can also learn about different techniques. You have sometimes free time to experiment with technologies, but what's missing from work is usually the whole ownership of the project. So especially if you're publishing an application on the App Store, then like it has kind of like this like bittersweet moment sometimes. Like when sometimes you get like a 1-star review and people just say that, hey, actually it doesn't work, it looks ugly.
That's harsh.
The interesting thing is that sometimes you can even change people's minds. So I was talking with some customer previously on through this contact page from my applications, and it's actually, I don't know if it was you. I hope it wasn't you. But the person said that he doesn't like that these new particles are everywhere in the software, and so I should change it or turn it off or something. And then, okay, wait. I was like, I spent time on that, so let's discuss like why is that so, and what would he imagine as like as a good-looking effect instead. And then he gave some like really nice ideas. He described like how he thinks about the software as like a natural art piece where you see things like similar to like digital leaves or tree branches and stuff like that. And then, okay, I kind of got his point. I made some changes, and I also did some buttons to adjust like how strong the particle effect is, and I tried to make it more natural. And he said that he liked that approach a lot, and he also gave 5 stars afterwards. So wow. These like tiny things, but it can be super rewarding, and
absolutely.
And it also makes you think about the whole product, not just the software itself. So I think it's something that is super difficult to learn through a normal day job. I think that's at the day job you can learn about techniques that you can use in your hobby projects, and also vice versa.
Yeah, exactly. It goes both ways. Yeah, I turned up the particles myself.
Okay, well, yeah, that's also interesting. I collect anonymous like usage information, and I also recommend this to people. Like, this is not something which is limited by GDPR. The main thing is that you shouldn't have anything that you track which is which can identify the user. But for example, you can track like what are the configuration options that the users set. And I added this button which adjusts the like amount of particles that are rendered, and I was wondering that, okay, now I can see like, is it really popular, or do people want it to be turned off? And so it has only 3 options now. Either you turn it off, you have it on the normal, or on the double amount. And what surprised me is that it has a totally even distribution. So you get 33% on all those 3 buttons.
Wow.
It was super surprising, and it's also something that makes me think that this is why you need customization, because people want totally different things.
It's the perfect thing to add a setting for.
And also like there are all kind of super positive surprises. Like as I mentioned, like in some cases they use this as a art piece, or people say that they use it in parties and it looks so cool. And one other thing that I see from these analytics is that the session duration for this application is super high. So on mobile applications, like for example, Handstrect or Centrade, it has like 1 or 2 minutes. That's normal. I think it's totally normal that you don't even use your phone more than that. Yeah. But on macOS, Ferromagnetic sometimes has 45-minute long sessions. So that's I'm super proud of that, because it shows that people actually like look at this software for that long, and it's not even something that you're interacting with. You just look at it, like, or you have it maybe playing in the background. Yeah. And this also makes me think that there are ways to make money with this, and it's again just about like ideas and time to implement them. And so one of the next things that I was thinking about doing is to maybe try to use this as a kind of like a background visualizer in some bars. So you could put the logo of the bar in the middle of the application, and then it could just go and react to the song which is playing inside the place. So. But I've been actually thinking about this for 2 years. But the problem is that when I started to work on this application, it was in the middle of the COVID lockdowns.
There may not be any bars.
So, and then, I got into this new job. And since then, I was focusing less and less on this. I still work on it some weekends, but this is also a good sign, because it shows that I like my job at the moment. So,
very true. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It was great fun.
I was talking so much. But
that's what podcasts are for. That's what we do. Tack för att just du lyssnar på Kodsnack. Om du vill stödja oss, varför inte tipsa en bekant om podden? Eller lämna en recension i till exempel iTunes eller något annat ställe där det går att sätta betyg på poddar. Du kan också stödja oss genom att köpa oss en kopp kaffe på Coffee. ko-fi.com/kodsnack. Alla pengar går direkt till att göra podden bättre och trevligare. Du kan också komma och hänga i vår Slack-kanal. Länk finns på kodsnack.se, precis som alla andra länkar och all annan info kopplat till varje avsnitt. Sist men inte minst finns det också en länk till vår Spreadshop-butik där du kan köpa tröjor och andra prylar med kodsnacktryck. Återigen, tusen tack för att du lyssnar. Vi hörs.
Let me put it this way, Mr. Raymer. The 9000 series is the most reliable computer ever made. No 9000 computer has ever made a mistake or distorted information. We are all, by any practical definition of the words, foolproof and incapable of error.